little early, but screen. So we are live now.
Okay. Hello there to you, those of you joining us. We're a few minutes early, so we're still getting set up, but better early than late, right? We don't want you looking for us right now. You can see a link to this session right there on that screen. You're welcome to go in there and get these slides. There's a lot of information in these slides. You're going to want to have access to them. Well, I'm making sure I'm muted and snoozing reminders and do not disturbing my phone and plugging in my clicker and all of those things. You know what I like on Do Not Disturb now is you can set it to Do Not Disturb for a certain amount of time. So you can do like 1 hour.
Yeah, mine actually has to default 1 hour. So that's how
You've done that a couple times.
Yeah, I pressed it on there. It says on for 1 hour. On until I leave. On until end of event. Oh, look at that. On until
End of event. I like that. Only at a tech conference will we get excited about these kinds of things.
Yes.
I can make my Do Not Disturb stay on until the end of the event. I'm currently rummaging for my tissues right now. I'm live stream. This is a live stream of me looking for tissues right now. Are you guys enjoying the live stream of me looking for my tissues?
You know, a hack. Here's a hack. I keep a flashlight in my backpack so I can flashlight and see down inside of it to see what's going on when I can find it.
Well, but what if you can't find the flashlight?
It's always in a place that's easy to find.
Okay.
That's the key point there.
Put the other stuff there. I wouldn't have figured the tissues were at the bottom of the bag. Of course they were at the bottom of the bag.
You know, everything's always the last place you look.
Last place you look. I'm going to mute myself while I blow my nose. You guys are grateful, I'm sure. Are you guys enjoying the live stream right now? Okay, it is about 3:14, so we're gonna go ahead and start. Good thing we didn't start recording until I was done blowing my nose. That was perfect timing. So we're gonna talk today about PodCLASSting or podcasting in the classroom. My name, as you probably already know by now, is Jake Miller. And I am a science teacher from Ohio, 8th grade science, but I'm also a podcaster. And it's one of my passions is podcasting. Now, I should tell you, I'm going to tell you this right up front. I have not started podcasting with my students yet. This past year was my first year teaching science. After a 10-year gap, I taught science for 1 year in 2011. And 1 year in 2020. So there was a lot of work going into just teaching the science last year for me, and podcasting didn't fit in, but it will be in my class someday if I stay in this role for an extended time. But it is in my outside of class life. As a podcaster, I host the Educational Duct Tape podcast. I've been doing it for about 3 years now. I've been listening to podcasts since, goodness, 2007 or so. I think I started listening to podcasts. They started a little bit before then, but I was pretty early on the podcast bandwagon, early enough that I had to download them to my iPod to be able to listen to them. So I've been listening to podcasts for a long time. And here we're going to talk about how this podcasting might work in your classroom. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things in here. We're going to bounce around. It'll be nice for those of you watching this on a delay because there might be some things in here that maybe don't apply to you and other things that really do apply to you. And here's why. Some of you watching right now are kindergarten teachers who'd like to help the students in your classroom grow their voice. Some of you are high school teachers hoping to create a school podcast that you think that your community is going to listen to. We have a range of levels of students and of content and of what we might want to do and of time. And maybe you want to start a podcast with you and your other teachers in your school, or the administration, or the instructional coaches, or maybe it's in your 5th grade classroom or your 12th grade classroom, or maybe it's a Spanish podcast for your Spanish class, or who knows. There's a lot of us doing a lot of different things here. And so we need to talk about kind of all of the different possibilities. So what we'll start by doing is talking about how to dip your toes in the water of podcasting with your students, because you cannot just day one say, we're going to podcast in this class. Go ahead and record a 1-hour podcast episode. No way. You've got to get students some exposure to it first, just like anything else we do in the classroom. We need to start with lower level versions of it. For example, many teachers have students do things like making book trailers in iMovie or whatever, or WeVideo or whatever video editing program, and they make a movie trailer about a book that they just read. And those movie trailers or book trailers end up being 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes long. And that takes kids, days and days of class periods to do. And it's a great representation of content level understanding. But you would be insane to say, today you're going to make a movie, right? A full 2-length movie. No way. Maybe those kids that do that will build up to that. Same thing with podcasting. If you try to start with more than a few minutes of podcasting and more than a few, just getting some audio from kids here and there and going straight to podcasting, you'll never get there. You've got to work your way up and find the level you're at. So we're going to bounce around and talk about a lot of different things. We'll also talk about some gear and things like that, because I know that's a lot of people's favorite things to talk about with podcasting. And so we will get to that in this session as well. Okay, so at this link, jakemiller.net/podclasting, you'll have access to these very slides with the information that we're going to talk about today. And there is a lot of information in here. You'll also get access to the giveaways that I'm doing in every session here at AETC. One that I'm giving away for each of my 5 sessions is a free sticker, either the correct one, in my opinion, or the incorrect one, in my opinion. So if you're the winner, you'll tell me whether you want the GIF sticker or the GIF sticker. It's hard for me to even say it out loud. And then I will put it in the mail to you. I promise I will Clorox wipe it before I send it to you, and I will not lick the envelope either. And I'll send you the winning sticker. One person across all 5 of my AET sessions will win a copy of my new book, Educational Duct Tape and EdTech Integration Mindset. And it does have a section about some audio tools that you could use in your classroom. So it does apply to podcasting as well. That book is not out just yet. Actually, my flight home to Ohio tomorrow morning, I will be doing my last set of edits after the editor has done her second set of edits. And so we're seeing what that timetable is going to look like. Hopefully by late July, it'll be out, possibly early August. Once that happens, I will mail a copy to one person who wins. And to win, you have to fill out that form right there at jakemiller.net/podclasting. Okay, so let's start talking about podcasting in the classroom. Okay, first up, why might you podcast? So these references, these sources, these citations actually come from a ebook from Nate and Angie Ridgway, which you can see linked down here. Oh, I left the G in their last name. Oops, I got to fix that later. A ebook from Nate and Angie Ridgway. They're the co-authors of a book called Don't Ditch That Tech, along with Matt Miller. But they also have this ebook they wrote called An Educator's Guide to Podcasting Beyond the Classroom. I learned a lot from it, got a lot of ideas from it. And these 5 reasons to podcast might be enough to pull you in and make you think that it's a good idea for your classroom. And these are citations that they included in their ebooks. That's where I found them at. The first up says that students see improvements in understanding and retention if they podcast. So have your students podcasting, they will improve understanding and retention. Second, students will develop intrinsic motivation through authentic expression, which promotes sustainable learning. We know this to be true, right? If you're making something that's a creation of your own, you're going to have a higher level of intrinsic motivation. And if you're doing something that's authentic expression of your own voice, then you're going to have intrinsic motivation. And we remember things better when we do that. A lot of the reasons that I am so good at remembering different educational technology tools is I authentically express my stuff about them them through sessions like this and my podcast, and I'm intrinsically motivated to do so. And because of that, I remember it, right? I'm a little different in the science classroom. Next year, when I teach my students the stages of meiosis, I'm going to have to brush up on that first, because I don't authentically express and have an intrinsic motivation for meiosis, right? And so I don't sustain all of that knowledge during the 360 days between one year when I teach it and the next year when I teach it. So I'll brush up on that. Educational technology, it's in here because it's sustainable learning, because I'm intrinsically motivated to authentically express it. And it's been shown to happen with students as well. Students will express differentiated learning, such as supports for students with specific learning needs, because the podcast can be played at different rates, because you can have captions used on your computer to listen to those podcasts, because students can create their own podcasts, and some might create longer ones or shorter ones. Some might script them and some might not. Some might work in groups and some might not actually be on the microphone, might be behind the stages or behind the scenes working on it. Because there's a lot of different ways that it can be done, that's going to bring in a lot of differentiation for students. Okay, so there's potential for differentiation with it. And finally, students will feel a greater sense of inclusivity and belonging to the learning community. And this is pretty obvious. We just saw, like, they wrote this in 2012, but we saw proof of this concept in 2020, right? Our students felt less inclusivity and less belonging in our classrooms while they were remote, right? And we did things like Flipgrid or video stuff or fun video chats, the level of inclusivity and belonging increased. And the same will happen with podcasting, right? You bring that podcasting in there and that belonging and that inclusivity is going to increase. If we are each hearing each other's voices and valuing each other's voices, then of course we're going to feel more included and feel like we belong more. And for those of us who are podcast listeners like myself, we feel like we know those podcast hosts. Imagine if that's happening with your students, right? We develop a better sense of understanding for each other by being in that setting where we're sharing with each other. Okay, so if you're interested in starting podcasting, I highly recommend starting with what's called micro podcasting. Okay, so micro podcasting is the idea that maybe you're not sharing a podcast that somebody's gonna go download on their phone and listen to at the gym. You're creating a smaller version of a podcast. Maybe you're just recording audio. Maybe the only person hearing it is your teacher. Maybe it's only 30 seconds long, but you've got to start somewhere, right? We've got to start some level. And this is what I was alluding to earlier, where I said, you can't just say, students, you're going to create a movie. You say, students, you're going to create a trailer, right? So likewise, you can't say, students, you're going to create a podcast. You need to say, students, I want you to record audio to respond here, maybe even before you start talking about podcasts. And also in terms of time, my podcast tends to be an hour long, the Educational Duct Tape podcast. And because of the format that I've chosen to go with my show, each episode takes about 6 hours, not 6 minutes, 6 hours from the time I schedule the interview with the person who's on until the time I press publish. 6 hours for a 1 hour long podcast. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So I see about 6 times as much time put into it. Other podcasts that maybe are a little more simple in their format, or just have different formats that require less editing and less planning and things like that, maybe are more conversational, they might only see 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times as much time spent on it, but it's a lot of time. And your students are not going to be ready for that right off the bat. We've got to start with something smaller, like micro podcasting. One reason, as I mentioned, is the editing. Another reason, do we need to script? And in micro podcasting, you probably don't. On my own personal podcast, on the Educational Duct Tape podcast, part of the podcast every week is scripted, and part of the discussion with the guest obviously is not. And some of the things that I say are not scripted, but I choose to do some scripting in some settings. But if you're scripting, then it's going to take you more time because you got to write the script first, right? Okay. If you don't write the script, then maybe you have to spend more time on editing though. So with students, we want to limit that cognitive load. I really like the work of John Carippo and Marlena Hebern. They wrote the books on edu protocols. Those are not related to podcasting, but the edu protocols are like these lesson recipes that you could substitute different ingredients in. So a certain activity that works well, and you could use it 1 week with meiosis, as I alluded to earlier, and another week with mitosis, same lesson format, but put that in. put in the different content. And they recommend when you first use these protocols, these lesson formats, these recipes, they say the first time you do it on a concept that students are comfortable with and excited to talk about. Do it about superheroes, or do it about candy bars, or do it about musicians, or favorite social media app, or whatever it might be, because then the cognitive load on the content is low, while the cognitive load on the strategy is high. So until they have mastered that strategy and are comfortable with that strategy, don't bring in content that's going to make it tough for them. So a nice idea is at the beginning of the year, which was the perfect timing for us to talk about this right now, maybe do some micro podcasting where you say, tell us about your summer, or tell us about your favorite sports team, or tell us about an activity you do, or tell us about a hobby, or tell us your favorite superhero. And then they get comfortable with the process. And then later you could say, all right, now you're going to record a podcast about the Civil War, because you have scaffolded that in. Okay. A couple different ways to micro podcast. One that I'm particularly excited about right now is using the Moat extension. It works in Chrome and works in Google platforms. If you're not a Google user, I'll suggest some other alternatives, or maybe if you can't use Moat in your school, maybe they haven't permitted it for student use yet. I'll suggest some alternatives, but one way that Moat suggests doing it, and this template comes off the Moat website, is this Google Slides template and you could use this very template by clicking that link at the bottom of the slides there. And that link is in the slides. That slide is at the link that I gave you earlier. You can go in there and copy this. And this is for an 8-episode podcast. You click on episode 1, it takes you to a slide with that audio. You click on episode 2, it takes you a slide with that audio. You click on episode 3, it takes you to a slide with that audio. And here's what those actual slides look like. So the student types in their show description, they type in their show notes and resources, and then they maybe record these 12 different audio files that go in here. And you just listen to them sequentially, and it feels like you just listen to a podcast. Okay. Now, this is a pretty complex version of it too. So we're going to try Moat together in a couple minutes. And when we do that, I would like you to, or I'm going to use not a complex a template like this. I'm just going to have you respond. So this might even be a 2nd level version or a 3rd level version of micro podcasting. Okay. So with Moat, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, because it's only been around for about a year, Moat is for recording audio notes. You do need a Google account, and I think it only works in Chrome. I guess I'm not positive about that part. And it originally only worked, I think it worked first in Google Docs comments to record audio comments. And then they added on Google Slides comments, and then they added on the ability to do it in Google Classroom comments, and then the ability to do record audio that goes into Google Slides, and then Google Forms, and then record audio from anywhere, and then send links to that audio. But the important one here is you could record that audio in Google Slides and put a link to it right into the page. Okay. And then other people can listen to it. Okay. Now in the free version, that audio can only be 30 seconds long, but you can have as many of those recordings as you want. And when you start recording audio, you'll realize just how long 30 seconds is too. It's pretty long. In the paid version, you can be up to 90 seconds, and it comes with a transcript. And there's one other issue. Some of your recordings stay in like a Moat, I forget what they call it, My Moat, maybe, where you keep all of your recordings in one place, but that's not essential. That's part of the paid version. But you could put your audio recordings in slides either with the free version for 30 seconds or the paid version for 90 seconds. Okay. So that's one version of micro podcasting, and I'll show you how that works in a second. Okay. The second version is using Flipgrid for micro podcasting. And the third version is using Padlet for micro podcasting. And I'll show you each of these in a moment, and I'll show you some other alternative options in a moment. So what I'm going to ask you to do is try out one of these 3. Okay. Whether you're live with me right now, or you're watching this session tonight or tomorrow, or whenever you're watching it, I would like you to try out one of them. Try out the one that you're most likely to use in your classroom. Okay. Or try out all 3 to get a feel for what they work like. And here's how you're going to do that. Okay. So at the link that I gave you before, I hate this Zoom thing that ends up right where I'm trying to click. At this link that you came to earlier, which is the jakemiller.net/PodCLASSting, you see the link to the presentation, you see a link to my feedback form, you see the slides, you see the giveaway form. Down below here, there are 4 other links. The first one is for us to try out micro podcasting with Moat. Okay. The second one here is just in case too many people are using slide one. I don't think that's going to happen for us in this situation, especially virtual. So we could ignore this second link. So if I click on this second link or this first link here, slides one, it's going to bring you to this slide right here. And it gives you instructions. Get the Moat Chrome extension, go to the next slide because that's going to be our recording spot. Okay, click the Moat button, and I see it right up here at the top of my screen, and then record your Moat. Notice I had a limit in this screenshot of 90 seconds. You might only have 30 because you're on the free version. That's okay. It's a good way to start off. So you'll go to this slide. Okay, you'll click this button right here. Oh, I see Anonymous Iguana is here with me. You'll click right here on the Moat button. It'll automatically pop up, and you're going to record. So what you're going to tell me here, let me bring this back up onto my slides here. What you're going to tell me here when you record is your thoughts about podcasting in the classroom. How do you think you could use it? Do you already use it? And how? Okay, so I'm going to jump over here. I'm in this slide. I'm on this spot. I'm going to click the Moat button. I'm going to click here to start. Hi, I'm Jake Miller. I'm a science teacher from Ohio, and I don't yet use podcasting in my science classroom, but I think what I might do in the future is have students record podcasts about each lesson in our curriculum. So one student might record, or one group of students might record on lesson one, and another group on lesson two, and so on. And then I could put them in order in one place for them all to watch them or listen to them and hear all about all of it. Okay, so I click here to end. It takes a couple seconds to insert. It gives me a chance to play it and listen to it if I want to. I could re-record if I want. I could trash my recording if I don't want it. And I click insert when I'm done. It doesn't take very long at all. So then it pops it out there on the screen, and I could place it somewhere for the students to listen to it. Now, when I put it there, I could put it in a certain place on the screen for other people to listen to it. Okay, maybe the teacher makes a template in the background where it says, if you are doing this, put it here. Or maybe they put a spot for every student and they say, put it by your name, and you put it at certain spots on the screen. I've seen certain ones where they have an agree or disagree template. And if you agree with something, you record Y and put it on the right. And if you disagree, you record Y and you put it on the left. Then if you're in the middle, you record Y and you put it in the middle, right? So maybe you have a template, or maybe you just have a blank canvas like I have here. Okay, note that when you click on these, you could change what these look like. So first of all, there's a recolor button right here. So I could change the color of my recording button if I want to. Okay, I can also replace that image. So I could right click on it, and here's replace image. So I could grab a different image to be my button. So it could also even be my Bitmoji or something, right? So I could have an image there of what my audio is, and then I have to click on that image to trigger it. Okay, so this will let other people record that audio and put it in there. I see some of you guys already trying it out. Okay, here's the second option. The second option is this Flipgrid, and I have set the guest password on this Flipgrid. And again, it's on this site right here. Flipgrid password is PodCLASSting. So enter guest password. I'm going to make it so you can see what I type. Pod capital class ting. Click go. Uh-oh, the first P must be capital. Yeah, the P was capital. And then in here, we're recording our audio responses. You can see one from me doing this a couple of days ago, and one from one of the people that attended that session. So watch here in Flipgrid. I click record. You'll see me come up here, I think. I'm not sure why. Oh, there's my video. There I am. You'll see the video come up, but under options, I'm going to switch it over and click on mic only. And now you see I'm gone, and it's just a microphone. Kind of like a podcast, right? Now, I can't go listen to this on the Apple Podcasts app, but I'm just micro podcasting here. I'm just getting my students used to it. Maybe I'm just tapping into the power of hearing their answers instead of seeing it written on paper. Okay, so now the kid clicks record. Hey, I'm Jake from Ohio. I am an 8th grade science teacher, and I would love to hear my students record podcasts about current events in the science community, maybe stuff that NASA's up to, or things changing in our world, things that relate to our content, but are also in the current events. Okay, record it. I can listen back to it if I want to by clicking next. Hey, I'm Jake from Ohio. I am an 8th grade science teacher. Sounds good. I'm going to click next, and it's going to be ready to go on the board here, but first I've got to give it my name. And then if I want to, I could change what this image is. So I could take a selfie to put there. Okay. Or I can add my name tag to it. And you'll just see my name. Okay. Pick the style I want, put it in place out there. I'm not sure why it's going off the screen like that. It's really odd. I can confirm that if that's what I want it to be. Oh, there it does. It does look okay. Or I can actually upload a photo. So in the last one I did, I uploaded a photo of my podcast logo. So you'll see that the students can maybe each recording is episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4. Maybe each student has their own Flipgrid and they record here. Or maybe it's like we're doing here and we're all communicating with each other and it's not truly podcasting at all. It's just kind of getting used to like using the idea of podcasting. But you really could have a grid for each student and have them record a podcast about different series of topics. Okay. Third option, the fourth link on the page right here is a Padlet. In Padlet, a lot of educators kind of stopped using Padlet a couple of years ago when they changed their pricing model, but you get, I believe you start with 3 Padlets in the free version, unless you were using it prior to that. But if you start using it for this, maybe you'll need to pay. Maybe your school district will say, yeah, great, go ahead and pay for it. But watch, when I click the plus button down here, it brings up a tab. I can give it a title. I'll say my name, and I can write something underneath it if I want to. Okay, and then under the 3 dots, I can click on it, and here's audio recorder. Click record. Hey, my name's Jake. I'm a science teacher in Ohio, and I would love to use podcasting in my science classroom to have students talk about maybe debate different science things. Maybe we could pick a different topic like debating climate change and debating evolution and debating cigarettes and debating wearing masks in the pandemic. And they can come up with 2 different sides and we can record a podcast about it and listen to it. Maybe it's a risky podcast idea. I might get in trouble with my administration if I do that one. So I'm going to click playback and save. It'll let me hear it first. Hey, my name's Jake. I'm a science teacher in Ohio. Sounds good. I would, of course, listen to the whole thing. I want to give it a title if I want to, and then click save, and you'll see it go out here onto the grid where now other people can listen to it. I just click away, and it's ready to go. Okay, and then Carolyn or Caroline, you look like you even beat me there. You were even faster than me. So we could do each of these different things to bring some podcasting into our classroom. I would love for you guys to try it out right now. Pick one of those 3 things to try. I am going to mute my microphone and I'm going to go through and check out a few of these. So take a few minutes to either, and again, the links are here on this site, to either record with Moat in my Google Slides, or with Flipgrid at that Flipgrid grid that's right there, or with Padlet at that link that's right there. And the question I'd like you to answer here is, tell us your thoughts about podcasting in the classroom. How do you think you could use it? And do you already use it? And how? Okay, while you do that, I'm clicking pause, I'm clicking mute, and I'm gonna let you guys go ahead and record. So let's take about 2 minutes to do that. Okay, we're gonna go for about one more minute because I see some of you still active on the slide there. So I don't want to cut off your opportunity to record here. So I'm gonna give you about one more minute to record things while I'm peeking around and checking out what you've already done. All right, let's go ahead and move. Those of you, again, that are watching this on a delay, if you want to pause and try out all three of them before you move on with me, or if you want to come back to this later, by all means, go ahead and do that. These are three great options for micro podcasting that you could potentially use in your classroom. A good way to give your students some experience with the audio and give you a chance to find out, number one, is this a good way for you to assess your learners? I think you probably will find out that it is. And also see if they hate it or like it, right? If they're tortured by just the idea of recording 30 seconds of audio in Moat or in Padlet or in Flipgrid, then maybe don't start a podcast, right? So this is a good chance, at least for them to get an idea of what this might feel like. Okay, and get them in the door on it. And there are a couple other ways that we could do this, but these are three that I recommend. Again, Moat is free. In the paid version, you get 90 seconds of audio, and the free version, you get 30. Flipgrid, totally free. You just need a Microsoft or Microsoft or Google account to access it. Padlet has a free version. I think you get up to 3 grids in the free version. You need to pay if you do more than that, but you can always archive or delete a grid. I'm talking not a grid, a wall, they call it, and make a new one. So you just have to have 3 active walls, or you can just keep using the same wall all year, right? Or why not just keep adding more podcast episodes to it? Okay. And again, on each of these, it could be a collaborative space where it's all the students, or it could be one grid or one wall or one doc or one slides per kid, right? And Moat also is playable inside of Google Docs. So you actually could use it in Google Docs too. Okay, so let's say you try micro podcasting and you're like, yep, we're doing this. We're making a podcast, right? We're moving forward with a podcast. So Jake, help me plan my podcast. So here are the steps I would go through. First of all, I would ask you to select why, to determine why. Why are you making this podcast? What is your goal? Not just because you need to know that, but because it's going to frame what you do. It's going to help you decide, what kind of mic do I need? What kind of scheduling do I need to make for this? What kind of planning do I need to do? Do I need to script it, or do I need to not script it? Do I need to do research? I mean, if your idea is to communicate the news, then there's going to be research. If your idea is that you have the funniest conversations with your students and you want to showcase those conversations, then you don't need to script it and you don't need to plan it. But by determining your why, it's really going to shape the plan of what you're going to do. Okay. And also, if you have a hard time determining why you're making the podcast, it's not going to last very long, right? Like, you need a compelling reason that's going to propel you forward. With that said, if your reason isn't lasting, that's okay, because by trying a podcast to last for 3 episodes and then deciding it wasn't the right thing, that does inform future decisions. Maybe you go, okay, that wasn't the right decision. This is the podcast I need to make, right? And then you decide. Okay. Step 2, after you know why you're making it, is who are you making it for? Who is your audience for your podcast? Okay. For me, I knew when I started the educational duct tape, my why was to communicate about educational technology tools and to help educators see that you don't have to know all of them. You pick ones that meet your goals. And my who then is educators. And when I thought about what educators, my real goal was to get educators who are want to improve in the classroom, want to do the best for their students, but feel a little nervous about technology. And by saying those are the people in my audience, that informed how I set up my show, right? I knew not to get too technical because I know who my audience is. I'm not speaking to the tech directors, even though a lot of them do listen to it, my goal audience is the educator, and that informed the format of my podcast. Like you guys, is your audience the parents for your class, the parents for your school district, just the students, is the student recording for their other students? Are they recording for people across the building? Is it for teachers? Who's it for? Is going to tell you a lot about the format that you're going to go with. Okay. The third step is why, again, but a different why. Why would that person listen? So you know why you're making the show. Why would they listen? What are they going to get from it? Right? Are they going to get enjoyment? Are they going to get news? Are they going to learn? Are they going to grow? Getting motivated? What are they getting from this? Okay. That's going to inform the setup that you're going to go with. Right. And it's also going to tell you if it's worth making. If you can't figure out why somebody would listen, you might not have a podcast to record, right? So understanding why they would listen is important for you. Okay. The next step is who, not who again, who, a different one. Who does this? Right? Who's going to speak? Who's going to research? Who's going to produce the show? Who's going to edit the show? For me on my podcast, it's me, and me. Actually, I've been paying somebody on the side to do some of my editing lately because I just was running out of time. But normally I do all of this, but you need to know, is there only one person speaking? Is it always an interview? Is it different people speaking at different times? Is it segments of where this student's this one and this student does this part and they come together to make one podcast? It's going to inform what kind of microphones you use, what kind of editing process you use by knowing who's going to speak. Who's doing the research that goes into the podcast? Who's producing, which means who's planning the segments and the content that goes in those segments. It might be all the same person, but by determining these things, it's really going to influence your plan of what you're going to do. Okay. Next up, what formats do you like? So this is where you need to listen to some podcasts. For me, when I started my podcast, this was easy. I already listened to at least a dozen different podcasts at that point. So I had already kind of done this subconsciously. Your students maybe haven't. So they need to listen to some podcasts and figure out what formats they like and which of those have styles that they want to match or mimic. I listen to some podcasts that are totally different from my podcast. I listen to others that are about totally different things, but where the host has a style similar to the one I like to use. So by understanding these different things, by thinking about what we like in other shows, that influences and informs how we're going to make our own. A couple resources, and by the way, there's a lot of resources linked at the end of these slides, but this resource came from a New York Times resource on students podcasting or podcasting in the classroom. And this particular one that's linked in that New York Times resource list, but it came from the Learning Network, is an activity called a podcast listening activity. And they selected, I think it's 3 different podcasts for the students to listen to, write in what the topic was, and write in the production elements that they liked about it. So of course you could change what podcast episodes that they listen to, but something like this where you have the kids listen, you have them summarize what they heard and write down what they liked. Did they like the intro music? Did they like that the intro music felt serious or felt silly? Did they like the segues? Did they like the sound of the voice? Did they like that it was an interview or that it wasn't an interview? Did they like that there was noises to make you feel like you were in the setting? What did they like? Okay, and what things did they notice and what things do they want to use in their own show? Or if this is your own show. Okay, here's another one that also came from the Learning Network, this one called Elements and Techniques of Storytelling. And it's a similar activity. You give the kids certain podcasts to listen to, and you say, write down the elements and techniques of storytelling that you hear in here. And this helps you inform the kinds of techniques that you'll use in your podcast or your students will use in their podcast by thinking about the way that they do things. So I hear different kinds of storytelling in my favorite podcast is called Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. And I hear him do lots of storytelling. Sometimes he does things in ways that I would never have thought of. And they inform the way I might now tell a story in my own podcast. I also really like a podcast called Akimbo by a guy named Seth Godin. And he has a certain style and the way that he rolls out an idea and ties it back to some greater meaning that informs the way I do it. But Seth Godin's not really a particularly funny guy. And I like to find places to mix in jokes. And that's something that I find from the Revisionist History podcast. So I observe, what things do I like? What things don't I? Okay. Finally, what's your plan? So now that you know who it's for, who's doing what, you know why you're doing it, why they'd listen, and you know what you like from other shows. Now you've got to make a plan. And this step is more than just preparing yourself to do it. This really is forcing yourself to see if this is something you want to do. During the pandemic, when my students we were trying to find extra things for them to do because we felt like their school wasn't giving them a full day worth of work, and we wanted to give them ownership over some things. One thing I suggested to my kids, my own 3 children, was recording a podcast. My oldest and my middle kids really took into this idea, and I said, okay, go plan it. I want you to write down the name of your podcast, who it's for, why they would listen, and tell me what the first 5 episodes are. My son never did it. That proved that he just was not going to stick with this idea. My daughter did it and determined that she didn't like her original idea, right? So you've got to go if you don't like the 5 first episodes that you've planned just in the picture in your head, right? So if you can't plan 5, you can't record 1. Like you're in a bad shape there. She now, because she went through that, she's working this summer on her own podcast about inspiring women. So my 9-year-old daughter is starting her own podcast about different inspiring women. And she's listed, I think, 15 or so women in a notebook that she has that she intends to do an episode on each. Now she's still excited, and she sits down a little while every day and researches at least one of those women. So she's proving to herself that she's dedicated to this. And by doing this planning, she truly knows what to do. Okay. And I tell her, sketch out the artwork that you want to have. We can make it look better later, but make a sketch of it. What's it going to be called? What kind of format? Is it going to be an interview? Are you going to script it or not? And there's no right answer. It's just thinking through these things. Okay. This comes from another template that is linked into the resources. It is a page I found. I think I found it in that ebook from Nate and Angie Ridgway, and it's literally called the Create a Podcast Workbook. When you open it up, you'll see the creator of it, I think, on the first page. I probably need to get it into my citation here at the bottom of the page. But this is a workbook that he or she uses with their students, where they have the students write out what the structure of their show will look like. There's not one right structure of the show. Apparently, this teacher says you have to have a 2-minute intro and a 2-minute outro, but they make them plan out what goes in the middle. So having some kind of template where they plan is a good idea. Also, in that same workbook, they have them plan out their podcast pitch. It says you need to have a focus for your podcast. This means it must be based on a theme, a subject, or an idea. On this page, speak about your proposed show and explain some segment ideas you have. Please note, this might change as you continue through the different stages of this workbook. And it says add an audio recording on this page. So they're actually having them use audio to express this. My show title is, the podcast type is, my show is focused on the topic blank. My target audience is blank because blank. And by doing this, you or your students are deciding, like, you're etching out what your podcast truly is going to be by forcing yourself through these decisions. Okay. Another resource, this one comes from an educator in Texas named Tisha Poncio. Tisha uses this. She runs a podcast with her students, her high school tech team. They have a student tech team. They call them the SWAT team. And they handle all teacher PD, not all, but most teacher PD in their district, the high schoolers, right? I can't see your reactions, but I know some of you are like, what? They handle the teacher PD, they coach teachers, they handle repairs, they help students with technical difficulties, they do all kinds of stuff like that. They also record a podcast. And this is the script that she uses with them, where they identify what they're going to be doing in this spot, who's going to be doing it, what notes they have there, what notes are going to go into the actual show notes. So this is a template that she uses, and you can see it linked at that bottom slide down there. Okay, so those are my ideas. If you want to make a podcast happen, those are my ideas of how to go through the planning stages of it. Now, the thing that a lot of people are excited to talk about is, what gear should I get? Jake, I see that you're sitting in front of a microphone right now. What microphone would you use? Okay, well, first of all, this microphone is a Fifine microphone, Fifine. I've never used one before. I've heard of it before. So at least it's not some like weird Amazon brand that I've never heard mentioned before. And you're hearing me right now. How's it sound? I don't know. I can't hear myself. It's a good one. Robert says it's a good one. So this is a good one here. So maybe you want to consider this one. You could hear me and decide based on that whether it's a good one for you or not. The first thing I want to say with gear is we just did micro podcasting where most of you did not have a professional mic, right? You either recorded through your computer's mic button or mic, or maybe your earbuds mic, and you got pretty good audio out of that. You truly could podcast without buying a single new piece of gear as long as you have a computer or a tablet or a phone to use. You don't need something new with it, but it's kind of the fun part, isn't it? If you're looking for microphones, let me give you a little bit of microphone advice, but please don't think you need to buy one. If you're looking for microphones, there are, first of all, 3 different styles of recording on microphones. The first is omnidirectional. Omni is where if the mic is here at 1, it records from all around it. This is great if you're recording a conversation with multiple people sitting around a table, because then you only need 1 mic, but you pick up all the voices. This is horrible if you're recording by yourself, right? Because you're picking up yourself talking to the mic, but you're also picking up Robert tapping on his cell phone across from me right now. And if I had an omnidirectional mic, that would be happening. If I have a bidirectional mic, that's the second one, and the mic sits in the middle, I'm picking up me and Robert again. And that's great if it's an interview, right? Because it's picking up this side and that side, but not over here. Okay. Cardioid mic is what I use at home for my podcast, because if Robert's across from me, you're not going to hear him in the recording because the mic doesn't pick up audio over here. It picks it up over here and a little bit over here. So most podcasters that you hear, if you're listening to a podcast, are using a cardioid mic because it only picks up from in front of the mic. It's totally fine to use the other types as well, but most podcasters use cardioid. But the decision you have to make is, this is why we did this earlier. Who are you recording? Is it just one person or is it more? If it's just one person, you want a cardioid. If it's not, you might want one of the other ones. Okay. The other part of microphones is they're either condenser mics or dynamic mics. The condenser mics are great for quiet sounds and they require a treated quiet space. If you go to a professional organization like NPR or like the New York Times or Gimlet, which has a lot of podcasts, or any of these big podcasting groups, or Serial, the Serial Podcast Network, or This American Life, things like that, they're probably using condenser mics. Those are professional microphones. You're in a padded room, you're by yourself, you're a pro, and you're getting great audio out of your microphone. I would sound horrible on a condenser mic right now, and who knows, this might even be a condenser mic. I would sound horrible on a condenser mic because I am in a room that could really fit 70 people in it, but instead has 2 people in it. And my voice is bouncing off so many walls from so far away, and it's going to pick up so many different levels of echo in here. So my podcast would sound horrible if this was a condenser mic right now because of the space. For a condenser mic, you want to be in a small, treated space, something, padding on the walls or something like that. Otherwise, it's not going to be a good one. A dynamic mic is really good for the classroom. Number one, it's good for people with bad microphone etiquette, a student who yells into it or they pop their P's into the microphone. It's not going to distort on a dynamic mic. On a dynamic mic, if you say pop, you're not going to get this gravelly sound when the P hits where you hear the mic get overloaded with sound. A dynamic mic can normally handle it. So for an individual podcaster, I would be looking for a dynamic cardioid mic. For a setting where it's multiple people around the table, I might be looking for a dynamic omnidirectional mic. The other problem with condensers is not only does it pick up a lot of echo, it also picks up all the little taps on your table or your feet moving around because it's great for quiet sounds, which might be exactly what you need and might not be exactly what you need. Okay. The other choice when looking for mics is, do you want a USB or an XLR? Depends on what you want to do with your mic. Are you plugging it into a computer? Then you want USB. Are you plugging it into some kind of professional recording thing? Then you want an XLR. I personally use one that has both, and I use the USB, but I know it has the XLR jack if I ever need that. Okay. And this mic that I'm using right now, I hope this doesn't sound horrible when I pick it up. You could just see one cord coming out the bottom there, and the other end of it is USB. XLR, you'll see a circle with 3 pins sticking in it. That's XLR. It's a big circle. It's what you'd see, like on a podium somewhere. That's normally an XLR mic. Okay, so you've got to decide what you want. USBs, where they're bad, is if you're trying to record more than one at a time, because you can't plug multiple USB mics into the computer and get really good audio out of it. In that situation, you'd want an XLR and something to record them into. Okay, so let's look at some mic recommendations. There are a lot out here. Here's 5 of them. These are 5 I'd recommend considering. I personally use this one in the middle here, the Audio Technica 2100 XR or X. That's the one I use for my podcast. It's not this one, it's the one I have at home. Actually, I have the older version. It's not the 2100X, it's the 2100X. Might be R, I'm not sure. But that's the one I recommend. But I would technically actually recommend this one on the left here, which is the cheaper, very similar mic, but cheaper. It's the Samson Q2U. That's the one. If you feel the need to get a microphone and you're in an individual recording, that's the one I would get, okay? If you're recording from a iPad or a tablet of some sort, you might want the Smart Lav that's, you can see has the 3.5 millimeter cable here for plugging into a headphone jack. Of course, it's not going to work on a newer iPad, so you might need a different plan for that. If you want to spend a lot of bucks on a mic, you might want this Shure. It's a fantastic mic, but there's no reason you need to spend $300 on a mic unless you think it's fun to do that, or you have a really good grant. Otherwise, I would stick with the ones towards the left here. Now, I skipped over this Blue Yeti one here because all of my podcaster friends mock me for recommending a Blue Yeti. Blue Yetis and Blue Snowballs are very unpopular in podcasting circles. It's like, I don't know what a similarity would be telling your chef friend that you really like the ramen noodle that you buy at grocery stores. That would make them really mad if you tell your chef friend that, right? This is also what a podcaster responds to here. They're just not the most amazing sounding mics. However, they're inexpensive and they're great. One thing that's great about them is that there's a button on them where you can switch from cardioid to omnidirectional to unidirectional. So you have 3 options. So if you're recording around a table with 5 people sitting around that table and you don't want to use individual mics, you want to use a Blue Yeti and put it on omnidirectional. You'd get better sound if they each had their own mic. But if that's not an option for you, then setting an omnidirectional Blue Yeti to that's going to work great. The biggest problem with them are their condenser mics. So if you have those 5 people around, you're going to hear every time one of them scrapes their foot across the floor and makes a squeak, or moves around the desk, or drags their bracelet across the desk. So that's why a lot of people don't recommend them, is you don't get the greatest sound out of them. Not horrible. Really, you're here to make content in a podcast, not perfect sound, at least I assume, right? So that's why I list that there. Down at the bottom here, I have a couple other ones that other people like and use. They're not good enough that they made my top 5 up here, but you couldn't go wrong with those ones. The Blue Snowball that is listed down here, same company as the Yeti. It's only like a $30 mic. It's not a very good one, but for $30, it's better than the mic that's built into your earbuds. Speaking of which, here's another microphone option. Your earbuds. There's a microphone right here, goes right by your mouth, and it picks up pretty good sound. It's good enough for you to make a phone call on it. It's probably good enough for your first trials of a podcast, at least until you determine if you're going to stick with it. And then maybe you invest in a nicer mic. So this is a pretty good option too. Okay. Now, if you really want to go pro, or if you're recording multiple people at the same time, you're going to need an audio interface or a digital recorder. Okay. And these are the 2 big ones out here. The Rodecaster Pro. I don't have one. I don't use it, but I'm also recording by myself in my basement. I don't need to have 6 different mics or 4 different mics plugged into it. And I don't need programmable sound effects. And I'm happy recording into my computer. I don't need to record to an SD card and then put it in my computer later. Okay. And then you have the Zoom H6. There's also a Zoom H5 and H4 and H3 and stuff like that too. They're all fine. They're great because you could plug 4 mics into them, and it has 2 mics built in at the top. I mean, it's a great option. Most podcasters are not going to need it, but if you want to build a podcast on the go and not have to lug your computer around, or you want to plug in 4 mics and get 1 audio file out of it, this is a good way to do it. Actually, it'll give you separate audio files too. It just puts it all onto 1 device. I've never had to use either of them, but if you need something like that, those are the ones to go with. Okay. Other valuable tools for podcasters, obviously you have to use headphones. If you're doing an interview, at least, you have to use headphones, because otherwise that interview sound is going to come back out of your speaker and back into your mic, and you're going to get echo. So if you're doing interviews, definitely use headphones for sure. Next, pop filters. This microphone here does not have a pop filter on it. A pop filter is either something that goes over it, like those pads, or something that goes in front of it, like that circle that you see sometimes. That makes sure that when I say the word porcupine, you don't hear the big hits of the P, which you might be hearing now because there's not a pop filter on here. What the pop filter does is limits the amount of air going into the mic so that it's not, recording a big sound from it. Okay. A microphone boom arm. I have on my own room, the place I record is also my desk where I do my work. So I don't want my microphone in front of me all the time. So I have an arm I brought off of Amazon that lets me pull my mic in and push my mic away. I think I spent $20 on it. Okay. So that's an option. So those are 3 additional tools you'll want to consider. Definitely want to have pop filters if it doesn't come with your mic. Most mics it'll come with it. That I needed a pop filter for that right there. It would have been a good time for a pop filter. Hosting services. Okay, so let's say you're doing a real podcast. You want people to be able to listen to it. Where are you going to put it? My podcast is on Libsyn, Liberated Syndication. They are the biggest podcast host out there. But statistically, they are. They're not free. They're not expensive. But they're not free. They are a great company. They offer great customer service, very supportive of the podcasting industry. They've been around in podcasting since like the beginning, like 04 or something like that. They were under a different name then, but they've been around all along. So if you mean it and you really want a podcast, Libsyn's a great one to consider. Also, you could do Anchor. Anchor is totally free. It's what a lot of schools use. The pitfall with that, a couple pitfalls. One is it's 13 and up. So that might be an issue with Anchor, is that if you're elementary school, your students can't own their own podcast, you'd have to own it. The other issue that makes some podcasters nervous is if I record 100 episodes and put them on Anchor, and Anchor's a free service, and Anchor goes under someday because that plan doesn't work out well for them, then my audio's lost. It's all hosted on there, and who knows if I can get it out of there or not. Whereas Libsyn, because I'm paying them, I'm feeling more confident staying there. Anchor is owned by Spotify now, so I'm pretty confident they're not going anywhere either, so you wouldn't be crazy to use it. Okay. What I'd recommend for most classrooms is to consider Soundtrap for education. So Soundtrap is a tool you could use for hosting your podcast. They also have an education platform. It's not free, but it involves a lot of like security and privacy and teacher oversight and teacher moderation of student work and things like that, that is going to make the student podcast recording experience a lot better. So especially if you're keeping it inside the classroom, Soundtrap for education is a really, really good choice. And we'll dive into that a little bit more here in a second. Some other options out there, if you're looking for free ones, Podbean, Spreaker, and Buzzsprout are all relatively well-known free options, although Anchor gets a little bit more credit because you can record straight from your phone and post online. Okay. Other schools, other teachers just record on Google Drive, or I'm sorry, just host on Google Drive. You record the audio, you post it to Google Drive, you share it as anyone can view, you put that link out there and anybody can listen to it, right? It doesn't play in the podcast app, but if that's not part of your plan, it doesn't really matter. If that's not part of your goal, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now you're also going to need to edit your podcast. So you need a digital audio workstation, or DAW, to use. I personally use GarageBand, just the one that works best for me. It's the one I like the way it works. The most commonly used one is Audacity. If you look statistically, Audacity is used by most podcasters. It's free. It works on Mac and PC. So most podcasters use Audacity. I personally just like GarageBand. I just do. So that's the one I use. Okay, if you're using a Soundtrap plan, certainly Soundtrap has their own editor built into it. So that's a great idea. If you already use WeVideo in your school for video, it's a great tool to use for podcasting because there's an option in there to just export an audio file. And that'll work obviously on Chromebooks, which is nice there. Okay, some people use Adobe Audition, not a free plan, not a free tool, I don't believe, but a good one. Okay, if you're on Android, you might want to use one of those apps. I haven't used them before, but I know they're recommended for Android users. Okay, a couple other options. There's some podcast or some audio editor. Twisted Wave is a free audio editor that'll work anywhere. Screencastify, if you use it for your video, you could export audio files too, but they'll be capped to 5 minutes if you're on the free version. Flipgrid, we talked about before, you could host them right there. Okay, and you can edit it in Flipgrid. And Beautiful Audio Editor also allows you to edit. I don't believe you can host from on Beautiful Audio Editor, but if you're looking for a free tool, those are some that you can consider there. Okay. I mentioned Soundtrap for Education. If you use Soundtrap, it integrates with your learning management system, probably. Okay. I don't know for certain that it integrates with all of them, but it integrates with many of them. Okay. You can create assignments from within Google Classroom into Soundtrap, maybe other LMSs, but I know Google Classroom works with Soundtrap. You can easily access your students' recordings, which is important to be able to, monitor what they're doing. You could get the recordings organized by assignment. So if you put out a prompt, even if it's not for the podcasting part, you just put out a prompt, you could see that content in your teacher platform. Okay. And Soundtrap offers what's called transcript-based editing, which means you see it automatically takes your audio and turns it into a transcript. Like you didn't plan a script before, it takes the audio and writes out what you said, which is really cool because if you want to take out the ums and uhs, you don't have to listen. You just find the ums and uhs, you highlight you click backspace, and it takes out that piece of audio like it never happened. And it just laces the two parts together. So you can go through and take out all the times you did that. Control F to find them all, take out the ums, take out the uhs, take out the likes, and go down through and just pull them right out of there. So that's a cool feature, nice for students. Okay. We talked micro podcasting earlier. A couple tools you might choose to use. Moat, we tried out. Flipgrid, we tried out. Padlet, we tried out. A couple that we didn't. Seesaw, you record audio in. Book Creator, you can record audio in. Vocaroo, a lot of educators use for audio. And then a couple of those ones I mentioned earlier too, could be some pretty good micro podcasting tools. Again, these are good ways for your students to get used to it before they try to actually make a real true podcast. Okay. Some other valuable sites for podcasters. I use Auphonic to level all of my audio. It's a free-ish tool. It depends on how much audio you're doing, but it makes the audio sound good for me so that if my interview guest was quiet and I was loud, it levels it out for me. You can do that manually, but this does it for you. Okay. Zencaster is the tool I use to do all my interviews over the internet. It's free. Okay. There's other tools for it, but that's the one I use. Squadcast is one you could use for it. I've tried it. I like Zencaster more. And then you're going to want, if you put music in your podcast, you want to make sure it's safe to put in your podcast, meaning that you have those rights. And a couple of good sites for it. I use the YouTube audio library. Some other sites are Free Sound and Ben Sound. I saw JEA Digital Media mentioned somewhere. I've never tried it, but that's one you could use. Some final podcast tips to wrap up with. I always try to remind myself to smile while I speak. Like I literally am talking with a smile on my face, and you can probably hear it in my voice in the podcast because that's what I want to sound like. I want to sound like I'm smiling. So I do it deliberately whenever I podcast. I'm smiling at who knows who down in my basement. Keep a tissue nearby, not because you're going to cry, but because you don't want any boogers whistling in your nose while you're talking. Please don't do that. I will stop listening to your podcast if that happens. Have some water with you. You want to make sure your voice is nice and crisp and clear while you're talking. And if you're starting to get dry and parched, you're going to be able to hear it in your voice. Do some vocal stretches. I do different, tongue twister kind of things before I start talking, especially if I'm doing a morning audio recording with an interview. I go walk out on my computer saying things like, unique New York, unique New York. My kids hear me walking around my class saying, you need unique New York. The big black bug bit the big black bear, and do those to get myself ready, get my mouth ready to talk. And also, if you need to take notes or anything while you're talking, you might hear you're typing. So you want to handwrite that stuff instead. Okay. I've gone so long because this is one of my favorite topics to talk about that we don't have time to address any of your questions here during the session because we wrap up in less than 1 minute. So if you have questions for me, please reach out there. That is my Twitter handle or Facebook handle or TikTok handle or Instagram handle. You can message me on any of those with a question at Jake Miller Tech. Also, if you add an @gmail.com onto the end of that, you've got my email address. So jakemillertech@gmail.com, and you can ask me questions. If you try out podcasting, I'd love to hear how it goes. I'd even love to check it out. Or if it's with your students and you can't share the actual podcast, just tell me about it. So reach out on social media at that handle there, or again, jakemillertech@gmail.com. Okay. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for the fact that during your summer, after the hardest year of your teaching career, you are here learning more for your students. That's just so awesome. So thank you guys for doing that. Hope you have a great day. Please reach out if you have any questions, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.